As part of my plea deal, I'm here to apologize in no uncertain terms for what I may or may not have done with that truck stop waitress in Moose Jaw, Wyoming in July of 2013. In my defense, at the time I had no idea that engaging in those particular acts was considered deeply offensive to most cultures, and two of which acts were actually illegal in 13 states. My attorneys advise me now to face up to it and make a clean breast of it. As part of my ongoing community service, I continue now with The Daniel Natal Show. In Washington, D.C., there's an old axiom. Two wrongs don't make a right, but they do make a precedent. In other words, once someone violates the Constitution and gets away with it, rather than the first violation being corrected, the next regimes that come in seize upon it and expand on it. John Locke concurs with this analysis. Back in the 1600s, he wrote, "The reigns of good princes have always been most dangerous to the liberties of their people, for when their successors, managing the government with different thoughts, would draw the actions of those good rulers into precedent, and make them the standard of their prerogatives, as if what had been done only for the good of the people was a right for them to do for the harm of the people, if they so pleased." Barry Goldwater, of course, worried about this in the 1960s. As Republicans drafted civil rights legislation and everyone went along to enact the precedent that the government could tell private businesses who they could serve, Goldwater dissented. He explained that public sector government bureaucrats, according to our Constitution, had no authority to tell private businesses what to do. He feared that this would set the precedent whereby socialism would creep in, insofar as the government would create a rationale to seize upon the means of production, because of course that's the very definition of socialism, the government control of the means of production, the state dictating to businesses. Knowing that we weren't set up as a socialist government, Goldwater shared his fears that this otherwise well-meaning act would be the camel's nose under the tent, the pretext by which an unconstitutional precedent could be set and the state's powers vastly expanded. He was of course shouted down and called a racist. Goldwater was not a racist. He was a constitutionalist. But he was assured that though the legislation was blatantly unconstitutional, it was a one-time thing. And hey, it was for a good cause, right? Just as John Locke warned 3 centuries before, hell would be paved with good intentions. A well-meaning violation of the law, claimed to be a one-time thing, would morph into a slew of future expansions of power and diminutions of the freedoms of the people. And with the next encroachment, the motives would not be so pure. But all they needed was a precedent. After this, the state claimed that it had the authority to force bakers to make cakes for gay weddings, to enact lockdowns and medically experiment on the populace, and to social engineer neighborhoods by suing to change their demographics. During the French Revolution, Frederick Bastiat talked about this. He watched as socialism took over his country and quickly decayed into communism. Under the slogan of liberty, brotherhood, and equality, the new Revolutionary Assembly started to remake the country. One of the things that Bastiat complained about was the communist penchant to try and micromanage everyone's lives, for their own good, of course. He writes, "A citizen cannot at the same time be free and not free. Monsieur de Lamartine wrote to me one day thus, 'Your doctrine is only the half of my program. You have stopped at liberty. I go on to fraternity.' I answered him, 'The second part of your program will destroy the first.' And in fact, it is impossible for me to separate the word fraternity from the word voluntary. I cannot possibly conceive fraternity legally enforced without liberty being legally destroyed and justice legally trampled underfoot. Legal plunder has 2 roots. One of them, as we have already seen, is in human greed. The other is in misconceived philanthropy." Bastiat pointed out that the legitimate purpose of government is the protection of the rights of its people. But gullible individuals are seduced into socialism, writes Bastiat, by its claim that government isn't about protecting rights, but about setting up the government as a philanthropy. Today, the French Revolution's calls for forced fraternity are akin to our modern mutant version of diversity, forcing people to hang out who voluntarily wouldn't have done so, taking people's freedom away in the name of helping them. Bastiat even addresses things like reparations, which we think of as new, but which has happened before, robbing one segment of society to redistribute the spoils to another. He writes, "When a portion of wealth passes out of the hands of him who has acquired it, without his consent and without compensation, to him who has not created it, whether by force or by artifice, I say that property is violated, that plunder is perpetrated. I say that this is exactly what the law ought to repress always and everywhere. If the law itself performs the action it ought to repress, I say that plunder is still perpetrated, and even in a social point of view, under aggravated circumstances. In this case, however, he who profits from the plunder is not responsible for it. It is the law, the lawgiver, society itself, and this is where the political danger lies." To read Bastiat's book, The Law, is to gain an insight into the process that Aristotle describes of how republics decay into democracies. If you read Aristotle's Politics, it's clear that what he means by democracy is what we call socialism today. Aristotle says that after a republic decomposes and turns into a democracy, demagogues will arise, bribing their way into power by promising the people free food, free housing, free healthcare. All they have to do is take it from the rich, they say. That's why the Founding Fathers in America roundly denounced democracy. To them, it meant what we call socialism. And they saw the reign of terror in France, with its mass murders and guillotines, and understood where socialism led. By the way, it might bear pointing out that in 1776, the word socialism didn't yet exist. It would only be coined by French intellectual Henri de Saint-Simon in the 1820s. In 1776, the only word that the Founding Fathers had was democracy to conjure up the same set of associations, because this is what everybody called it since Aristotle wrote about it thousands of years earlier. This is why the Founding Fathers never called for America to be a democracy. The word does not appear in our Constitution, nor in our Declaration of Independence, nor in any of the particular state constitutions. We were supposed to be a republic. A republic protects individual rights. A democracy, by contrast, is mob rule and doesn't recognize individual rights. It only recognizes the collective. A republic protects private property. A democracy, on the contrary, believes that all private property belongs to the state and can be redistributed at will. According to Aristotle, the end goal of a republic is the promotion of virtue among the people, whereas the end goal of a democracy, he says, is equality. Plato, for instance, writes, "Such is democracy, a pleasing, lawless, various sort of government, distributing equality to equals and unequals alike." In the Republic, he talks about how in a democracy standards erode and everything is equalized, good and ill. He says that in a democracy, the citizen and the illegal alien will be treated as equal, the parent and the child, the vice-ridden and the virtuous. He says that in a democracy, anarchy is the law, not of the state only, but of private houses, and extends even to the animals. Father and son, citizen and foreigner, teacher and pupil, old and young, are all on a level. Fathers and teachers fear their sons and pupils, and the wisdom of the young man is a match for the elder. This last part reminds me of Oscar Wilde's quote, "In America, the young are always ready to give to those older than themselves the full benefits of their inexperience." Plato goes one step further and says that in a democracy, the fetish for equality will be so pronounced that animals will be held to be on par with human beings. Needless to say, this happened recently with animal rights advocates claiming that animals should be given human rights. See here. Of course, a modern version of Plato's Republic might be entitled Clown World, because it describes the moral, intellectual, and political collapse of a society, from freedom to authoritarian clowniness. What strikes the student of history, however, is how very similar the template is. Whether you're calling yourself the Jacobins or Bolsheviks or Antifa, the rhetoric and the slogans are the same, albeit with minor variations. For instance, instead of liberté, fraternité, and égalité, it's LGBT, diversity, and equity. But the methods are the same. The goals are the same, and the brutality and censorship are the same. It's like Groundhog's Day. Study the English Civil War with Oliver Cromwell, then jump ahead a century and study the French Revolution, then leapfrog to 1917 and examine the communist takeover of Russia, and then look at what's happening in America today. And you feel like you're looking at a trend line with an arrow pointing at a particular juncture in the arc, saying, "You are here." People fear any political leader who has his finger on the red button. What political leaders fear is people having their finger on the red button, the subscribe button. Push it and see their narratives explode. Also consider donating to help keep these videos coming. And don't forget our website and newsletter, thenewamerican.com.